basically, hey, had I known that this was the case, maybe you wouldn't have done the deal. In which case you could say, hey man, if I had known this, I wouldn't have done the deal. And so I'd really like to just unwind it. I'd like a rescission. And that's certainly something that you could go, that's a legal remedy that you could go for, but we try to avoid that as much as possible. And so if that's what you want, then I would say, the truth is that you told me this was the case and it's not. And so it's just not a deal that I want to do. So I would like to unwind it. Let's talk about what that looks like.
Had a quick question for you regarding how would you handle if, let's say you purchase a deal, you get into it 5, 6 months with your team, and then you have an idea that the seller or broker misrepresented the deal. So initially they had mentioned, for example, that no more than one client was 20% of all revenue, but it turns out at least in a few months out of the, actually probably 5, 6 months out of the year, it's closer to 40%. And now there's a 3 month break from the contract until it
Okay.
starts up again. So, I mean, whether it's intentional or unintentional, like what are your thoughts?
What would you like to have happen?
That's a great question. Because you go into a deal and you think even with the legal due diligence, like, okay, well, this is the situation, but it turns out that, oh yeah, over these few months, that's not the situation. So your schedule drop, like your clients drop a certain percentage. So I don't know if I mean, what repercussions there would be,
I
or
wouldn't think
typically,
about it that way to start with. I would think about what do you want to have happen? So, okay, so it's not what you thought it was. In an ideal world, you can wave a magic wand, and the only thing you can't get is you can't get what wasn't true to be true. So, given the set of facts that you've got right now, what would you like to have happen?
that's a great question. I have to think about that.
And the things that I might be thinking would be, I would like a lower purchase price. I would like um, uh, a
Well, the deals,
hiatus
the deals
on
all,
payment.
yeah, the deal's already gone through, but so that's where like 6 months into the deal, for example.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's basically, hey, had I known that this was the case, maybe you wouldn't have done the deal. In which case you could say, hey man, if I had known this, I wouldn't have done the deal. And so I'd really like to just unwind it. I'd like a rescission. And that's certainly something that you could go, that's a legal remedy that you could go for, but we try to avoid that as much as possible. And so if that's what you want, then I would say, the truth is that you told me this was the case and it's not. And so it's just not a deal that I want to do. So I would like to unwind it. Let's talk about what that looks like. Or yeah, I mean, this is not what we talked about. And I paid this and I want some of it back. I want a rebate, or I want an adjustment in payments, or I want a change in equity if they've got a carried interest or whatever. I think you just have to figure out, what are your most desired outcomes given the fact pattern that you've got faced with, and what are the top three in order of preference, and then see if you can go about negotiating one of those outcomes without litigation. And happy to brainstorm that here. And then once you know that, you go and you have that conversation and see what you can do to make it happen. And worst case, you can't, and then you make legal decisions. But very often things like that can be worked out.
Got it. That's what I was thinking. I mean, we still know we can grow this business like crazy. But it was kind of disappointing, and we don't know if it's 100% true yet, but I'm just thinking down the future with it. So no, I like those ideas. I'll have to think more about it, but we're not thinking rescission yet, but yeah.
Yeah. So then is there a financial or other, financial or non-financial offset or adjustment that could be made? Do you have any continuing payments or rev shares or earnouts or anything like that with the seller?
No earnouts, no. This was SBA deal. And
Okay. So you
we
got an
inject
SBA loan and gave them cash?
yeah, exactly.
Okay. And is there any amount that is continuing to be due to the seller, any seller financing or other payments?
Accounts receivable, but those are almost finished, I
Okay.
guess.
Well, that'd be a place to look, right? I just look at like what are the things that the seller continues to have a right under your deal to get, and you could potentially recapture some or all of those things. If there's nothing left, then is there anything that you could get from the seller that is financial, meaning I'd like to have 100 grand back, or not financial, like, gosh, I'd really love to have the seller go out and market for me and go to 6 conferences and make 23 referrals. And if I could get that, I'd feel better than if I had the 100 grand, right?
Got it. Got
That's
it.
you making those decisions about what would be important to you and what's on the table and available on the menu, I think is a really good place to start, because you may find, like, very often the other side feels guilty about it, or they get caught and they don't, and and they realize they got caught and it's like, and so either they intentionally or unintentionally made this misrepresentation, and now they feel like they've got to make it right. So use that and know what you want and ask for that first. And then if you can't get it, then we talk about what the other options are. But very often you might be able to get them to do something that is way more beneficial than something, than money or something else, had you done the deal this way originally, because you're now 6 months in and you know so much more about the business.
That makes sense.